Connecticut and Massachusetts, Z&M Homes buys houses. Sell your property to the local guys.
Needs repairs, updates, maybe foreclosure or inherited? No problem. We got you. Google or add us on Facebook at ZANDMHomes.com.
What is it?
It's Bexy's musical podcast.
Since the very moment that Elvis Presley shook his hips on national television on June 5th, 1956, on the top-rated Milton Berle TV show, there was a fear that rock and roll music would be the downfall of civilization, lead to the destruction of our moral fiber, and would poison the minds of innocent young teenagers, leading them down a terrifying path of drug abuse, Satanism, and sexual promiscuity. And that was just the good stuff. But as it turned out, America was heading in that direction anyway. Rock and roll didn't just create all that sloppy stuff, but man, did the girls ever love it. And as rock music grew a little bit older over the next few years, so did the girls. So by the 1960s, a new phenomenon was created, a female-dominated subculture known as groupies. Groupies were typically female fans who just wanted to meet their favorite rock stars. That's all. And if it meant they had to aggressively push and fight their way backstage to do so, then that's just what you had to do. But in that subculture, there were certain groupies that became almost as famous as some of the rock stars that they coveted. Pamela DeBarge, Cynthia Plasticaster, Laurie Maddox, B.B. Buell. They weren't just groupies. They were often girlfriends, or better yet, inspiring muses of musicians on the road. And then you had perhaps one of the most notorious of them all, Cherry Vanilla. Born Kathleen Doherty in Queens, New York in 1943. Cherry was, in fact, a self-described groupie. But if that label were the only thing you knew about Cherry Vanilla, then you would be missing out on one of the most amazing life stories in rock and roll history. Was she a groupie? Sure. Did that amount to an awful lot of sex and drugs? Oh, yeah. But what separated her apart from everybody else is that Cherry Vanilla was also an actress, a publicist, a poet, an author, and the lead singer of her own punk band. But it gets better than that, because Cherry Vanilla was also part of Andy Warhol's inner circle and starred in several of Warhol's theatrical productions. She was also in advertising. She was also the publicist for David Bowie during his first tours of the United States. She was a regular fixture in the back room of Max's Kansas City in New York. She was also convinced by Miles Copeland to fly to England at the very height of the UK punk scene, where she would play with a couple of guys named Sting and Stuart Copeland of The Police. She would also release a couple of albums of her own on RCA Records, and they were awesome. And then she would later run the American office for the late Oscar award-winning composer Vangelis. Much of her life story can be found in her 2014 memoir entitled Lick Me, which is a great, great book. What I'm trying to tell you is this. There has rarely been another woman that has found herself at the right place at the right time more often than Cherry Vanilla. And she's my guest today on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Hello, Baxy.
Hey, Cherry, how are you?
Right on time.
Oh,
Thank you.
Not a problem. I just read your book, Lick Me. So I feel like, so I got a good handle on things and what your life has been like up until like the last 13 years or so. But there's two things that stick out for me in that book. And the first one is you didn't seem to get out very much. You seem like a homebody that never wanted to leave.
Really?
No, I'm being totally facetious.
Oh, okay. Because I am like that now.
Well, I understand that, but back in the 60s and 70s, that was certainly not who you were.
Well, we lived a great time. We lived through a great period, and we had our youth and energy, and we had the drugs and music, and you just wanted to be out every night in New York City at that time, and it was so exciting just to go out to the local, Max's Kansas City or something. It was always exciting. It was like you were going on stage or something when you'd go there,
The other amazing part about the book, and what you're talking about kind of, leads into that, is that it's hard to imagine that anyone ever has had better timing in their life than you. It's like everything that happened in your life happened at the perfect time. You were born at the right time. You got into music at the right time. and you had this pattern of meeting amazing people, just being at the right place at the right time. Tell me about that, because as I'm reading the book, I'm going, how is this woman getting so lucky?
Well, of course, in the book, I focused on the good times more than the bad times, because I went through a lot of bad times and dealt with some dishonest people and all that kind of stuff. But I focused on the magic that had happened in my life, because so much of it was luck. I had a good work ethic that my parents had given me, so I was willing to work at anything to, keep my dignity, keep head above water, and keep pursuing some artistic endeavor. So I was very responsible, very practical in a way person. There was magic that just happened. I mean, you're absolutely right that I would, be in a certain place at a certain time. And I don't know what to call it except, it was the fact that I followed my instincts, which I still do totally. And sometimes they're wrong, but a lot of times they just led me in the right direction. And also, like I know people now, and they're such star fuckers. They're celebrities themselves, and they're star fuckers.
Right.
And the thing is, I wasn't really a star fucker. I mean, people can see me that way. I got thrills out of it and excitement out of the challenge of, getting to some beautiful Chris Christopherson or something when no other girl couldn't, That was all wonderful and fabulous and everything. But the friends that I made in life and the reason I was attracted to certain people was just because of who they were, like Michael Kamen and just so many good people in my life. And it wasn't because they were famous yet or anything like that. Even Bowie, at the time we met him, we were kind of on the same level as him because we were Warhol stars after all,
Right.
So, the combination of just taking responsibility for staying alive and well and being kind of brave and weathering the little storms that come, I took chances and I followed my instincts and it brought me through. And yes, how about the people? I mean, when I think about who I was close to in whatever way, sexually, work-wise, career-wise, music, I mean, Andy Warhol, David Bowie, Tim Burton. I mean, these incredibly intense people in my life, Sting and all, I'm like, I'm not the smartest person in the world. I'm not the most beautiful person in the world. And I'm like, what the fuck? How did I attract these people,
It's interesting because in the book, when you talk about that phase where you are a groupie, there was a lot of women who are doing that at the same time and still do, but there was something very definitive that separated you from everybody else. One, it could have been about your love of the music. It could have been about this fearlessness or not having an intimidation point of celebrities. I mean, your sister had been a governess for Don Amici and his family. Do you think that's one of the things that separated you apart from some of the others?
Yes, that and the fact that I was older. I had already had this corporate Madison Avenue experience because I started on Madison Avenue when I was just 17. And so I had already had this responsibility of travel, not first class, but, business travel, responsibility in an office and budgets and productions and dates. So I had already established myself as quite an executive head in a way, although I was always kind of funny and crazy about it. But and by the time I decided I was going to be a groupie, because I kind of decided that, I was like, well into my 20s, probably, and some of these girls, like, who I adore, Sable Starr and Lori Lightning,
right,
and stuff like West Coast girls, they were 15. And so what did they know? And so I had much more of a base. And I hadn't heard the word groupie until I saw that film with Iggy Pop, Groupie, whatever it's called, Groupie.
Right.
And when I saw that film, it was like a light bulb. It was like, oh, yeah, I'm like that. I want to hang out with all the, musicians, and I love them, and if I love their music, I want to fuck them. That's the honest truth.
Sure.
And
But even as you were describing it in the book, I mean, and I think this is a big misconception about a lot of groupies, that it was not, the primary goal was not sex. The primary goal may have been about other things, whether just to get close to these people, get to know these musicians, or at the best case scenario, become some sort of inspirational muse for some of them. I mean, it wasn't the primary goal for you, and it wasn't the primary goal for a lot of them.
That's right. It wasn't the primary goal ever. I mean, hanging out with Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Leon Russell, and all those people, that was like, oh my God, I was in heaven. It's funny because something guided me through this whole thing. I don't want to take credit for, like, I did Groupie better than she did Groupie, or I mean. But the thing is, a Groupie is a muse. At best, some kid just wrote me recently doing a high school thesis or something on groupies, believe it or not, and he wanted me to explain like what a groupie was, and I said, well, at best, a groupie is a muse. She gives he gives affection, support, humor, and at worst, it's just somebody who wants to put a notch in their sex belt. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah, there's good and bad to everything, and there's nothing wrong with the girls who just want to put a notch in their sex belt. That's fine by me, but I wanted to know, sex was how else are you going to get an hour with your favorite rock star, or a night with your favorite rock star, except if maybe he takes you home and you go to bed with him. You know what I mean?
And the way it is now, I mean, even if you were able to get backstage at a show, you're not meeting anybody but roadies and security. That's it.
Oh yeah, so different. It's just like you say, I was in such a right place at the right time. It was the same with like the disco world, the club world. When I was DJing in a disco and stuff, there was no velvet rope yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anybody who and the clubs were tiny, and anybody who went there, or the back room at Max's, knew they belonged there, and they didn't need a velvet rope to keep people out or so. And so it was that moment before it got like too big. The freedom of the openness of it just had to go because of security issues and everything, I know. I went backstage at a Roger Waters concert a few months back, and I couldn't believe, I was honored in a way. My friend who brought me and myself, we were the absolute only people to go backstage. And I was like, well, wow. And, it was so security conscious. We were escorted in just to Roger, and we were alone with him in a room. I was like, wow, this is like really, in the old days, you just hung out in the hallways drinking beer with everybody, and you got what you got, know?
So I've been in radio for about 30 years. So my radio career started in the 80s. And back then it was a much different experience.
Right.
As far as, we would get backstage, and that was exciting for people. If they want a backstage pass, that was like finding the golden ticket in a Wonka bar. But the reality of it now is it's become such a big business that there's nothing to see backstage. In fact, it's maybe the biggest waste of time you can get, because there is no opportunity for connection at that big level. Maybe it's smaller clubs, it's a little bit easier, but it's not that much easier to get back there now and to have those moments. And I certainly knew enough people who were getting backstage, who were groupies, who whether it was sexual or beyond that, I kind of understood their mentality. But today it's like, man, this is not you could never get away with that today.
I know. It's such a different world.
Yeah, it really is.
Everything. I can't believe how fast everything's going. But did you see Moon Age Daydream?
I've watched half of it so far.
So I saw it in IMAX, and I was so dazzled by it. It was so beautiful. I adore it, by the way. And I was just dazzled and hypnotized by it. And there's even my voice in a couple of little spots.
Yep.
And I didn't expect that. They had asked me for it, but I didn't know they used it. But I was so dazzled by the whole thing. I just left there so satisfied, like I had just left a fabulous concert. But I watched it on HBO the other night, and with closed captions, I could get every word. It was printed out and everything that he was saying and everybody was saying. And, I got such a simplistic but so deep a meaning out of the whole thing that Brett Morgan, I love movie directors who can make documentaries that are so different. Like, he made that one, The Kid Stays in the Picture, too.
Mm-hmm.
And, he didn't make the Mick Rock one, but the Mick Rock one was so different. Like, not your ordinary documentary. And, I realized the way he strung some of Bowie's quotes together, like at the beginning of the movie, and Bowie, he's asking him about religion, and Bowie, he says, is anything your religion? Kind of, I'm paraphrasing, and Bowie says, he thinks about it for a minute, and he says, life. I treasure life so much, And then to bring it to the end where Bowie knows he's dying and giving up life and talking about it himself. Oh my God, I was like, this movie is just about the greater truth of just, we're here for but an instant and dig it,
Yeah, it's true. It is true. But I was talking to somebody about David Bowie, who was a little bit younger than I was, and maybe they don't get it. But I think when you look at who he was, I mean, in my opinion, short of the Beatles and Bob Dylan, there's never been anything like David Bowie. There's never been anybody more influential and important, not just to music, but really to culture than what Bowie brought to the table. You knew this guy before any of that happened.
Right.
But I remember as a kid watching him on TV, and it was like this atom bomb just blew right up.
Right.
And it's David Bowie. He wasn't just everywhere. He was so unique and so ahead of his time.
Right.
And to sustain that for as many years as he did.
Right.
I mean, that's almost impossible to imagine.
Even the way he orchestrated his death and the year or two leading up to it and after it with the play and the album. I mean, look at me, I'm in heaven. Or I can't believe what he was creating art out of his own death,
I remember listening to that last album, Black Star, right after it came out because I bought it right away, and I can count on my hands how many times this has happened, but it's never happened like this. I had goosebumps listening to the whole thing.
I know
because at that point he had already died, and you knew exactly what he was singing about in every song, giving his things away. Having this tribal type of thing about life and death, and it was just a remarkable piece of art, and in a way, kind of a gift to all of his fans on his way out.
I know, it was just, and the way Brett Morgan brought it like through the film, the thread. It's so simple, it's so basic, but it's so beautiful, and it's exactly, for all the spaceman qualities that he had, and he comes down to it. He's just saying, it's but a spark of life, however Shakespeare said it, I forget it, but, it's so short, and just enjoy it while you're here, and try anything, and, and the other stuff he was saying about chaos and creativity, in a way, the chaos I feel now, probably because I'm old, and I can't keep up with the pace of the world anymore, but, he's saying near the beginning of the film about an artist creates in chaos, and yet they're always looking for the form and for the norm and the form to try to fit in, but they need the chaos to create. And, I feel like now we're in a time, and maybe it's the only thing that gives me hope for this world, is that we seem to be, in my mind, in a time of chaos, because everything is going so fast that I I mean, all of a sudden it's AI. What? We created this thing that's smarter than us, and now it's, we're putting it in charge. I mean, oh my God. So anyway, I guess I'm doing PR for Brett Morgan. Not really, but I just think he made such an incredible movie, and having lived through many of those moments in it with David Bowie, it's hard because sometimes people reenact or project things the way they remember them or saw them or heard about them or read about them. But this was Bowie in his own words for most of it. And
Yeah. Let me ask you about him a little bit more specifically, because, I mean, you ran, PR for his first U.S. tours and were with him for a number of years, working for him, working for, with Angela. When he first comes to the United States, obviously nobody really knows him. He's in Max's Kansas City. He's hanging out with Warhol. He's hanging out with you and a bunch of other people. And this is before that star really begins to rise. What was
Right.
David Bowie like at that point in his career, and how did he change over the course of time?
That's the funny thing. He didn't really change that much. He was one of these people who attracted people around him to help him. Anybody who was around him, they wanted to do for him. They wanted to support him, to help him. That was even before he was mega famous. So he had that thing, and there are other people in life who have that. Some of them don't even become mega famous, but they have that thing where people just want to help them. They attract people in that way. And he never changed because, and he just always seemed to be confident that, he'd have a roof over his head. He didn't seem to worry about the basic things of life, even though they had no money at all when we first met them and everything, him and Angie. They must have worried about that stuff, but David always just seemed to have time to sit and draw pictures and write and talk, and he didn't change.
It's funny when you talk about it like that, and you go back to like the days when you were a kid and you're hanging out with your sister at Don Amici's house. For all the stars that may be in a young kid's eyes, in a moment like this, you're reminded at some point that at everyone's core, even a David Bowie or the Beatles or Andy Warhol, even at their core, they're still a human being.
Right.
And a lot of people, I think we have this sense of celebrity that almost takes that humanity out of them. Like they're somehow like these magical beings. And in fact, they are simply just human beings with very unusual jobs.
Right. That's what I was trying to tell you about when I saw Moon Age Daydream for the second time. That's what I got from him. He's saying, I'm just a man, just like you. Just like, we live and we die, and hooray, It pointed out his humanity more than the first time I saw it, which, as I said, I was just dazzled. I was also very high, but I was dazzled by the IMAX and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the core, we all are. We're just, God, we're so insignificant. We're just little specks of nothingness,
In 1971, you were part of the Andy Warhol universe. I don't know if you would consider yourself part of the Andy Warhol factory, but you were part of the stage production of Andy Warhol's Pork and a few other things. He seems like, I watched the documentary about him not too long ago, and he seems like this, elusive figure. Like you wonder if it's, who Andy Warhol really was, if it's possible to have known who he really was. What were your impressions of him when you were in that period?
Now, again, Andy was one of those people who had that quality where people wanted to do things for him. People wanted to help him. I don't know whether it's they act helpless, but there's a quality I can't put my finger on that they attract people who say, oh, I'll do that for you. And Andy had that too. And Andy was a voyeur. He just loved watching human nature at its best and worst, And he, again, there's this confidence. I never had it. I was always too worried about, well, I got to get another job. I got to write another article. How am I going to pay the rent? Yada, 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 yada. But Andy Warhol, David Bowie, Sting even, God, when Sting was first working, being my bass player, you know, he had $0. He was a squatter, him and his wife and baby. And yet he had that thing already, like it's an ego thing, but it's quiet, and they don't like advertise it, but people want to like help them, you know. And Andy, you know, he had a kind of good sense of humor that I don't think people talk about much. But he got a kick out of the way everybody wanted to just be at his knees, tell him stories. And what is that? I can't name the quality that makes people attracted to these people, but they turn out to be big artists, big stars, and influential human beings. And you're attracted to something before they even become that.
It's kind of this innate charisma that some people just have.
Yeah.
They just draw that energy to themselves. And I think you're right. I think he and Bowie are, you know, both share that, and Sting does too. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the things that keeps coming up throughout the book, and you know, clearly throughout your life, the importance of writing for you has always been like one of these essential key components of who you are, whether it's, you know, writing copy or, you know, articles or press releases or poetry. It's always been a part of your makeup. Tell me about writing and how it has been important to you.
When I was a child in Catholic school, we had to write compositions. That was my favorite thing. You know, I didn't like history or geography or any of that very much, but I loved English, where we had to write things. And I always felt that and the teachers would confirm that I was good at it. And I kind of, and it was almost secretly held this thing in my mind that I think that I'm a writer. In my family, I could say that to my mother or my father. They go, yeah, just learn how to type. Just learn how to type. Forget about the poetry. Just learn how to type. You know, they were so working class, my parents and my family, that there wasn't an artist in our family, according to them. You know, we didn't raise artists. And I would get married and have kids and, you know, maybe be a secretary or something. And so there was this kind of thing that I kept secret, because I was like, maybe one day I'll show them, because, you know, they don't know. The teachers know, and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, and also, it was something that I wanted to be able to learn. I'm not a very good student. I hated school for the most part. And I'm impatient with learning. But with writing, I knew in order to do it, I'd have to do a lot of it. I'd have to learn a lot. And like when I first did, like editors helped me and stuff. When I first wrote for these fancy Australian magazines and stuff and started interviewing stars for personality profiles, I didn't know what I was doing. And editors gave me clues, and they kept saying, you know, you don't have enough quotes. You gotta. It can't be about you or your feelings or your opinions. It's got to be this person speaking through you. But I learned on the job, like with everything I did. I learned by doing.
Yeah.
In advertising, it was that way. In acting, in performing, anything, in writing. And the thing about it's a romantic thing for somebody. I kind of maybe always knew I'd be a loner and end up being a very, like, a single adult. And writing is something that you don't need another person for. And you don't need your musicians and your co-writers or anything. And you can do it on your own, and you can use it as your own psychology and everything. And also, it was a kind of I'll show you to my family, and especially like my sister, who caused me to be homeless once, even though she was wealthy. And I remember having a fight with her once, and she said, "You're no writer. Writers write." And I said, "Well, what do you think I've been doing? How do you think I've been earning a living?" And blah, blah. "You're no writer." And so when I wrote, so I didn't speak to her for, I don't know, 30 years or something. So when I wrote my book and it came out about 1 o'clock in the morning, California time, and she was on the East Coast, I get a call from her after, I don't know, 20 years, whatever it was, and crying and saying, "Oh, I read your book," and I just patiently listened and, just thought, okay, that's very nice. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So it was like a little bit revenge. I have that Irish fight thing in me, like, give me a little challenge and I'll show you,
You took that writing skill and you were not only writing a lot of poetry later on, but you were performing it
Right.
on stage. You talk in the book about John Lennon and Yoko Ono being in the crowd a couple of times. But you also at some point took those poems and turned them into lyrics and performed them with music. And it's fun. I interviewed Kasim Sultan about a year and a
Bless
half
his
ago.
heart.
What a wonderful guy. And we talked very briefly about him in your band, because we had there was a lot of other things to talk to that guy about. But you talk about someone who's kind of gone like full circle in this. You have a love of music, a love of writing. You follow all these musicians at the same time you're running PR, and now you're doing exactly what like documented points in your life, where finally you're performing music and recording records, much like the people that you have been associating with for like the last 15, 20 years of your life. It's actually kind of interesting that you would fall into music
Yeah.
in that way.
Well, I've used this word before in interviews, but I'm a demystifier. I always want to know what it feels like to do that or be that. So I always wanted to know what it felt like to travel on an expense account as an advertising Madison Avenue lady. And I always wanted to know what it felt like to be naked on stage in an underground theater. And I of course, PRing rock stars and then being around them so much, I was like, well, I wonder what it feels like when the moments are right and everything. Because, as being close to them, you can feel when those electric moments come. And I wanted to experience that, and I did. I mean, we had awful moments on stage when I would sing the wrong song to the wrong chords.
Yep.
I mean, I had some disastrous things. I had trouble singing on key, all that kind of stuff. But there were moments. I had those moments. There were moments when everything gelled, and all that we practiced came together, and it was just floating. We were just going. It might have only lasted, 45 seconds, and it was a moment there in that song, So I got to feel that, and that's what I wanted with everything that I do. I want to demystify what it feels like,
At some point, Miles Copeland, who started IRS Records, convinced you that where you needed to be in your music was in London, and he hooked you up with Sting and Stuart Copeland and Harry Padavani, who was the first guitar player for the Police.
Right.
And this is your backup band, and then obviously this is long before the Police would become the Police, but these are
No, I got them their first gigs as my support act.
That's amazing to me.
Yeah,
That's amazing. So you talked about Sting being one of those charismatic characters, but the Copeland brothers are kind of there too in their own way.
Oh yeah. They were very. Miles was quite influential, but Miles is writing a book, or maybe it's out already. I don't know. But last year he contacted me and said, "Oh, I want you for my book." And I said, "Fuck you, Miles." After I had left London and I was having a really hard time in life, I tried to reach him I had an idea about something, and nobody would even get back to me, return my phone call. So he goes, "Oh, really? I don't know if I remember that." I said, "Well, then you had a terrible office, and fuck you,
Yeah.
But then
you would not be the first or last person to have that "fuck you, Miles" moment in there.
Yeah, well, there were things. It's too long a story. I don't want to go into negatives, but he
Of
was
course.
very positive in the whole music business, and he tried to do some things that unfortunately I signed to RCA and they wouldn't let him do with my music, and so he was a good and influential guy. And in that moment that we were together, he was mostly trying to help his brother and his brother's band, but so they're doing quite well. The
Oh, yeah.
Copelands and the Stings of the world.
It's almost too bad I don't have you on Zoom today, because I had something I wanted to show you, which, and I didn't realize this until I was like in the last couple of chapters of your book that you were a part of this, because I had completely forgotten. But I actually own a copy of the Vangelis album, See You Later. I actually own a copy of that.
Oh, wow.
I was
That great cover. Isn't that a great cover even now?
The cover's awesome. And, I went through this prog rock electronica stage, many, many years ago, and I had a couple of his albums. And in the book, you talk about how, you had a business relationship with Vangelis, and you ran his U.S. office. But then you also talk about how influential he was on you in pursuing your writing career and other things. And you talked glowingly about him, but then you didn't get into any real specifics about him. I know he passed just a few short years ago. Tell me about him, because this is a guy that very few Americans know about, other than the fact that he was an Oscar-winning composer. I mean, that's really all they know about him.
Again, and can you believe the variety of Andy Warhol, David Bowie, Sting, Vangelis? Like I say, these people that I play a role in their lives, whether it be business-wise or, it's beyond me. But I met Vangelis when we were both RCA UK artists. I met him at the RCA offices in London, and we became friends. And I didn't work for him until many, many years after, 95. So 97, I started working for him, actually, and opened the office in L.A. And the reason there isn't more about him is because the book kind of ends when I get signed by RCA, and then the rest is just an epilogue, because there is another whole book too, but I'm too lazy to write it, and I didn't keep diaries as carefully, and a lot of the people are dead that I would want to ask things about certain. Anyway, but there's with my whole life, like Tim Burton, there's so many stories after RCA. But in any event, Vangelis, he was, oh my God, talk about charisma. He was just the most upstanding gentleman, genius I ever knew.
Yeah.
The kindest, most generous, not only in material things, but generous in his time for you and his interest in you, and just an amazing man. And so that was thrilling, the little bits I did. There's a couple of things, a couple of singles and a couple of other albums. I do little voice things on it for him.
Yeah, you did narration for the song "Not a Bit, All of It" on that record.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was so funny. And he had this beautiful studio in London. It was a very romantic period. We weren't really that involved sexually. We kind of got together once or twice, and that was it, But we knew we were going to be friends, even though we weren't going to be boyfriend-girlfriend kind of friends. We were going to be friends for life, and we were. And I'm so sad in his passing. I'm so sad. He was the greatest gentleman I've ever known, really.
Wow. As I hear you say, you've been too lazy to write the other book. Having read the first one and saying, my God, this woman's life is absolutely insane. I'm incredibly curious about what comes after the RCA thing, and what the second half of your life must have been like. And I'm sure that I can't possibly have enough time with you to go through all of it. But I do hope you go and finish that book.
I don't know. Well, it had its ups and downs. I had a lot of down period too, hard times to get through.
Yeah.
But that's kind of always good to talk about once you get through them because it can kind of help other people, you hope, anyway.
Well, the good part is downtimes are usually temporary conditions. There's always some point where a high happens.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
It comes in waves, beautiful little waves. And Springfield, I've spent a lot of time in the Berkshires,
Yeah, I was reading that. A lot of time in Stockbridge, the Berkshires, yeah. And
West Stockbridge especially, yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Those are magic mountains up there. It's beautiful.
You're always welcome back.
Again, I'm so lazy I don't want to travel. COVID, when COVID hit, I was like, yay. I'm like such a loner. I've turned into such a loner. And maybe I always, like as a kid I was, and then I went out and pushed myself into this public world. And now I sort of return to the childish loner again,
Like I said, when you do release a book or you do get around to finishing it,
All right.
I would love to get a copy of it.
Okay, you got it. You got it.
Jerry, it's been a real thrill to talk to you. Yeah, your life story is a fascinating one, and I wish you all the best of luck and health in the world.
Thank you so much. Anytime you want to do a follow-up, I'm happy to talk to you.
That would be wonderful. I appreciate
Okay.
that. Thank you,
Okay,
Jerry.
honey. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. The name of Cherry Vanilla's 2014 memoir is entitled Lick Me. You are definitely going to need to check that out. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to follow, subscribe, tell all your friends about it, share it at will. You can find me on all the socials and email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. And thanks, as always, to Z&M Home Buyers at znmhomes.com. And thank you for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.